My name is Meeta Dikshit. I'm a co-founder of Equations, and we are one of the few family business advisory companies in India, and helping and guiding family-owned businesses in various areas of their challenges. I'm also a member of the Institute of Management Consultants of India, IMCI. Today's topic is about decoding the second G, that is growth. I'm pleased and privileged to have two prominent advisors as speakers today who will share their views on growth and their experiences on growth with family businesses. I take this opportunity to introduce our guest speakers. Mr. Walter Vieira, the co-author of the 5Gs of Family Business. Mr. Vieira is India's management guru and an authority on marketing. He has worked in the corporate world for about 14 years. And before he started his India's first marketing consulting company in 1975. Since then, he has guided innumerable business enterprises on marketing and growth strategies. A prolific writer, an enchanting storyteller with a great sense of humor. Mr. Vieira has authored 15 books on management, including our joint work, The 5Gs of Family Business. He is a business columnist and has written for the Economic Times, Business World, and several other top magazines. His recent column, Lessons from the Past, in Money Life magazine, is fetching excellent reviews. Mr. Vieira is a visiting professor at business schools in the US, including Kellogg's. He is a former chairman of ICMCI, world's apex body of management consultants spread across 45 countries. He is the chairman of Consumer Education and Research Society and a trustee of Money Life Foundation. Welcome, Mr. Vieira. Sir, my first question to you. You have identified the 5Gs, which are responsible for success of family businesses, their longevity, and their legacy building. Why is growth the second G in your book? Is it so important? And if it is, then what happens to businesses when there is no growth or degrowth? So please share your views on this.
Of course, without Genesis, the company would not exist. Genesis is the laying of the foundation stone. After that, the company has to grow. It's like human beings. There's no such thing as remaining stationary. You either have to move forward or you just stand there and decay and die. So growth is not a choice. It is a necessity. Either a company goes forward or does not move at all. It decays and dies. And we've seen so many examples of this in India and abroad. And one of the cases that is mentioned a few pages in the book is of Kodak. 126 years, virtually a monopoly around the world. And management of Kodak thought that the company will never die. And yet it did. And there are so many examples. Therefore, for me, growth is the second most important G in all the business, and especially in family.
You said and about Kodak, and there are many companies which are there right in front of us, which we know that yes, they have been either complacent or been arrogant, or has been other issues because of which they have not been able to grow and sustain across generations. Our another guest speaker is Mr. Atul Pradhan, being a renowned management consultant and a member of IMCI. Mr. Pradhan is a senior corporate advisor. He advises clients on growth, profitability, and governance. He has more than 30 years of experience with clients. Atul was a part of the team that brought KPMG to India and served as the managing partner of the consulting practice in early 2000. Prior to relocating to India, Atul was part of Nolan Norton and Company, the strategy arm of KPMG in UK. Over the last 10 years, Atul has advised a number of family businesses on strategy, transformation, and performance improvement. He is actively involved in the startup ecosystem and is a founder director of Lead Angels, a Mumbai-based angel network. Atul serves as an independent director on Camlin Fine Sciences Limited, and he is a nominee director, Investee Company Boards of FMO, the Entrepreneurial Development Bank of the Netherlands. Welcome, Atul.
Thank you, Meeta.
Growth is a natural consequence for any business. Growth is not a choice, it is a necessity, without which the businesses cannot exist for long. Now, we know that, in spite of knowing that, we find that almost 56 to 60% business enterprises, they close down or sold off or they stop their operations in the first generation itself, not the entrepreneurial stage itself. There are two major reasons. The experts, and especially on family businesses, the experts, they say the two major reasons for such short lifespans of family businesses is lack of growth and lack of succession planning. Now, I please share your views on how successful companies manage their growth trajectory, and particularly in this VUCA environment, how do they manage their growth trajectory, and how do they look at growth, and what changes are happening in businesses, family businesses? Atul, to you.
Okay. What I've found working with family managed businesses is that one of the challenges within the family structure is you talked about succession in your book also, Mr. Vera, and you have identified, I think 56% is the failure rate in the first generation. See, let us not forget that these businesses, if they reach a certain level of growth and of stature, that is brought about principally by extraordinary people. These individuals are extraordinary individuals, and the challenge is that when you look at, I'm borrowing again from an academic paper I'd read many years ago, I think the thinking mindset of the patriarch, usually it is a male dominant structure, is that of a king, so there is an absence of the concept of tenure, so what it does is that it does not let them even think of creating roles for others. So while they are alive and able, they think they are because they have brought the company to its present level of stature, it's a limiting condition as I see it, which limits the creation of roles for others, and it's a negative spiral. That's one. I think one of the challenges is to, as advisors, what we do is that we help them think like ambassadors, which means we bring in the concept of tenure, that you are there as in a role which is in a way transient. You will bring it up to a platform. It sort of ties in with what we had once used as stages for growth construct, which says that you have to build platforms, and the founder can build a platform, but only taking it further needs institutionalization of processes and thinking, and that is where I think their prime is their inability to institutionalize processes to take the growth and the organization forward. It remains person dependent, and it remains I call it an owner intervention business. Everything the owner will intervene. And finally, you talked about the VUCA world. I mean, COVID is beyond VUCA, because at least VUCA, there were some principles. COVID, I don't think anybody in the world, even before Ricardo or even our own, traditional economists, ever thought of a state-planned shutdown of the economy. I mean, that's an unheard of concept. That one day, with a fiat, you shut down the economy. I don't think nobody in the world has thought about it. So this is, I call it beyond VUCA.
We had read about Black Swan, but this is Black Swan event that has we all are experiencing across the world.
This is almost like a blank screen, that you can't see anything because the government has just switched everything off, one day. And not only in India. Now, let's not go into the merit of why and how, but, under those circumstances. But surprisingly, what we find is that it is the entrepreneur, it is the neighborhood kirana shop who shows evidence of critical thinking, of being still able to survive. The corporates and the big shops, the so-called organized retail, they just shut down their shutters and went home. We were kept afloat by the innovation and the entrepreneurship of the kirana shop. So, that is what they are unable to translate into an institutional process. And it has several dimensions. One of the challenges is that they don't get access to talent which will help them institutionalize. The A-listers never join. So there are many reasons why, and I think those who do it successfully go on to the third, fourth, fifth. Let's take some of the groups, even you've quoted, the Tata Group, for instance, is one group, where they institutionalized, I think Mr. Veera can correct me, but Mr. Saklatwala was the first so-called CEO who was not a family member. And that was before our lifetimes,
Yes.
They didn't let the whole thing, and even today, Tata Sons is still headed by an outsider to the family. So I think if you can go over that hump, you institutionalize those processes. I find that is one of the single biggest reasons why families can keep growing after that.
I think, very true. As you said that there is a hunger for growth. It could be just the survival. Kirana shops, they are hungry, they are innovative, because survival itself is a big issue, big challenge. And then the stage of complacency also sets in, where the growth
Correct.
is taken for granted. And usually we see in many companies where such complacency comes because of lack of succession planning also. Now, when we say growth is so important, and how does succession affect the family business in their growth strategy? Because family business literature, research, experiences, practice all zero down to three areas, where one is growth, another is succession, and third is governance. So these three have to be aligned and in place, these factors. And so growth strategy along with succession. What is your take on succession planning? How do businesses, or say, how do families, promoter families, are taking succession? I'm going to ask both of you this question.
I'll start with an example. I was working with a family business who were into engineering plastics. So they were one of the biggest commercial tool rooms. They had a captive commercial tool room, and it was like everything's centered around the tool room. But that's besides the point. So we had to, like a bit like Copernicus and the others, we had to move them from being a tool room centric business to a molding centric business. Because that's what their core business was. But anyway, one of their challenges was that they were looking at an application for a defense application of plastics. They had done the automobile, metal to plastic transformation. So they were looking at, typically it's a defense application, because anything exposed to minus 40 is the kind of polymer they were looking for. So one of the family members and two family members and a professional working for them were asked to go search for a appropriate raw material. Okay, so I was sitting with this patriarch in the room, and they came back very enthused, oh, we found the solution, we found the solution. So we said, wonderful, what is it? So they said it is this polymer, and it is going to cost us €3.60 per kg. Now, the patriarch had built the business with his uncle ground up. So he had his heuristics. These businesses run on heuristics, whether it is a more sophisticated form of Padta system that the Birlas use. So he did his mental math, saying, what will it cost me to, in energy terms, in machine terms, and this, that, and the other. And he says, घर में कुछ गिरेगा नहीं, typical of the business community. And I could see, that the two second generation family, third generation family members were instantly dejected, and he then they sort of, kind of all three of them went away. And then he says, hey, look at these youngsters, they don't think. I said, I'm looking at them and I'm looking at you. I said, your challenge is so robust, and with your sort of background, you built it ground up. The costs of the molding cost, the energy cost, the labor cost, everything is on your fingertips. You can do the math. You have to let me teach them standard costing so that they'll come up with a better answer next term. That's the language of doing business is different. So succession there. Now, if this happens time and again, now these children of the third generation was properly invested in. It's not that they were sent to the right business schools, they were given the right exposure on the shop floor. But this extraordinarily robust challenge that comes from somebody who's vested in the business is actually, I find that it led them to take a step back and say, oh my God, now we couldn't even get this simple thing right. Just as an example, I think succession, let's look at the bigger firms. Now today, institutional processes means that you start with looking at competencies. You start looking at, in the bigger firms, we started looking at the high potentials. we start creating a pathway for an easier glide. We start with an assessment center because, I remember in my old firm, we started a partner admittance program, and then we found, that people they've not had any experience of being partners. So one day, it's like dumping someone into the swimming pool. It's a sink or swim approach. We came up that way. I was told one day, go to Bombay, you take up the consulting practice there. I was just a senior manager in London. So one day simply but so we realized that wasn't the way to bring up people. So we started with a sort of an assessment center, and then we realized that before an assessment center, a year before that, let's have a development center. Let us identify their development needs. So unless you bring in these institutional processes to letting people succeed first create a role, empower them, create the right conditions. And that is what I would feel, that succession can be handled differently. Of course, Mr. Vera has seen much more than I have. I'm sure he has many more things to say about how succession can be successfully done.
Mr. Vieira and me, we had a lot of interaction while we were writing this book, and succession stories. Oh, so many stories that he had, and I was all wondering that what is a succession? All this can be itself a book or an interesting read by itself. But coming to Mr. Vieira, what is your take on growth of the business and succession planning? So how do you relate succession planning with growth? What do you think that succession planning helps in growth, or at times succession planning goes wrong and businesses they collapse? So what is your take on that, sir?
This has been more an exception than the rule, but otherwise a lot of attention has to be paid to planning succession, identifying attitude and aptitude. And this is where, Lord Liverpool had the wisdom not to pass on his company to his own sons before he died.
Yes, not to pass on the company.
He professionalized it immediately in the next generation and told his sons, the company will run much better without your interference, and you will get more money because they will run it better. Mario.
Yeah, that is not just the vision of the founder, but it is also very, very rational and objective way of looking at the business, not just the inheritance that you are passing on to the next generation, but you are making your next generation prepared to take over that inheritance or take it forward. I would just add one point here from my family business experience and working with promoters. We use a term entitlement for younger generation lots. Entitlement being the family. And entitlement also has got several connotations. Usually the families or the founders of the families, when they think that entitlement of children is there for the management of the business, running of the business, without preparing them, then the growth path doesn't continue for long. I think Atul will also agree some cases where we have seen known businesses also where the successors are not groomed, trained, they do not have the passion, and ultimately they are given the reins and they are given the gaddi to sit and run the operations, but that doesn't last for longer time. And then there are entitlements which are inheritance. So many, exactly like you gave the example of Mr. Lever, children would get dividends, they would get shareholding, but they would not be running the business. The competent, capable people would be running the business. In a large family-owned businesses, where there are multiple brothers, there are cousins and I guess it's siblings and cousins consortium, they are running the enterprise. Then the biggest difficulty for the professional CEO is to balance the whims and fancies of various family members. And ultimately then it precludes him from doing his job effectively, and he is not able to deliver what he's supposed to. Probably there are too many bosses or there are too many family members, and he has to maintain the balance. So can you share your experience of how such a situation can be handled in the most dignified manner?
Okay, when we set up Transferline, the first job was to, in a way, help transform a manufacturing business. And here, the founder's family was third generation, their employees were third generation, everybody was third generation. Employees were even fourth generation because they had this very benevolent culture. And, once the third generation, fourth generation, I think there were some 14 members in the family who were in the business. And typically it had a mix of everybody, those who were really passionate and interested to those who could care less, but had to be there. Just in a way, sometimes even to protect their interests in a strange way. So anyway, the challenge was once the chairman decided to come to the shop floor. Obviously, there were generations of workers who were touching his feet. As he was walking through the shop floor, people were touching his feet and all that drama was happening. And he says, that we want to find a CEO for this business. So our partner, one of our partners was leading the assignment, and he said, very difficult. So he says, why? He says, the first CEO to come in will ask you not to come to the shop floor. Because if he ever has to take a scene taking decisions, he cannot have you overshadowing him, And the moment you step onto the shop floor, his entire authority is going to be undermined, no matter how competent he is. So finally, actually, we said, let's do one thing. We do a little bit of, force of personality consulting as well. So we said one of us will step in as the interim or the locum CEO, because we can even tell you don't come to the shop floor. The CEO as an employee may not be able to do that. So we handheld them for, and we ran the entire process. We did a competency mapping. We identified the roles for the family members, told some of them, you do not have a role in the family. We put, we working with some other advisors, we put in a structure which said that managing your family and your personal financial interest is a separate activity from running the business. So we divorced the two, we brought a split into that, and we said, so that was one good example of how, we were able to bring in, create the conditions, but it invariably means, that a very strong personality. See, you talk about entitlement. I think there is a bigger problem of entitlement in the society, which I don't want to go into, but especially into our family businesses. I have seen examples of extraordinary arrogance and hubris amongst, and and for the, I don't usually call them professionals, but to distinguish them from non-family executives, let's call them that. They come from a culture where you have to earn the right to be heard, right? We all come from that culture. Yeah, it's a culture. It's an earn out culture, that I have demonstrated my work, my worth, and therefore I expect you to hear me in the fullness of things, Now, this generation, if it wants to come in and be heard just because of entitlement and being born to the family, I think it doesn't go down well with a lot of people, and if you're, if you lack the basic, I think in your book I find, I think it was Mr. Gaitonde that you quoted, who used to go and meet, of Century Enka, who used to go and meet the workers and everybody, and his, Mr. Birla then arranged for his daughter's wedding and everything. I was reading that example.
Yes.
It is essentially that humility that you should have to say that, doesn't matter if I represent the owners of the family, but this is a fellow professional. Actually, he or she can do something that I can't do. You have to recognize that some of the values of entrepreneurship, Mr. Veera talked about what I call as entrepreneurial agility, which is usually missing from the first generation, because the second generation has been taught in a different way, they've been brought up in a different way, and the third generation, if it survives, it is completely entitlement based. So it is those things, if the family can keep its values and respect professionals as well as themselves, then you have created the right conditions for proper successions to happen. But it has to be based on what you might be good at doing. It should never come out of saying, just because you're part of the family, you should be there. It is a recipe for disaster.
I totally agree with you, Atul, and I'm a little tempted to give one bit from my side also to this question. So you need to separate family dynamics from business dynamics, and that is what we do at Equations and I as a family business advisor. So it's very important when the family needs to prepare themselves, educate and train themselves to allow outsiders work in their premise or in their areas of business or the strategy or the direction. They also need to be groomed or primed to listen to outsiders and go according to what outsiders think. And that is where a large chunk, like when we work with our families, the first thing we do is to put their family vision in place, not just the business vision, but family vision and values in place. And then you need to have your family policies. Unless the family members, especially with the siblings and cousins being together in the business, it's very important that their roles are clearly, distinctly defined, and then the roles of professionals are aligned with families' long-term goals. So I guess this is how the family and business dynamics, we need to separate it out.
And this is the reason why, based on what you and Atul have said, growth is more important than even Gen Next.
Gen Next. Growth is more important than Gen Next.
Because
Yes.
if there is growth, and to ensure growth, you can always find people to work for you and to ensure keeping on that growth. But
Absolutely right, sir. So it is not that because of Gen Next the growth happens, but the
That's
growth
right.
has to happen. Gen Next may or may not align themselves with growth. Absolutely. Now, Atul, I have this one question because you work in the startup space. We are seeing in last 10 years, the transition of family businesses has happened to millennials. Our socio-economic fabric is also changing, especially with technology and digitalization. I think, could you throw some light on how the startup space or the growth that is happening, which is multidimensional and not just in the traditional way the businesses are run? There are many avenues of growth we are seeing around us. It could be horizontal, vertical, three-dimensional. So, how the growth of the business is taking place? This, if you share some thoughts.
Now, what do we find? That typically I had this discussion with a Harvard professor once. About you talk about innovation in an economy like India, where we are actually somehow we can't even make a distinction between the word jugaad and innovation. Coming from the north, jugaad to me is not a very good word. We can't even make that distinction between jugaad and innovation. So, how do you deal with this? So he says, you have to. As long as there is evidence to suggest that you are thinking and you are doing something different, you are looking at it from a different angle or a different perspective, and you're trying to incrementally improve it. Transformationally improving something may be difficult, and it happens once in a while. But incrementally improving some things, is always possible. So when I look at it and I look at all the startup ecosystem in India, what do I find? That there are good examples of how traditional business families have supported the startup ecosystem and have made certain critical bets. Today, we find that a lot of family offices are, looking at very actively looking at from angel through to the whatever the levels, series A, B, C, D, you know how it is, it works. So we find that they're there everywhere. And what is helping those family offices is the fact that they are manned by outside professionals who come from the younger generation. So that is one change that we are seeing. The second is traditionally family business members are in a way schooled at home to look at only one thing, which is loyalty to the family. And what I find is, and I often say this to families where I work with, I said, you have probably never let a person go for non-performance. The only reason why you've let people go is for them having either failed the loyalty test or they've committed a fraud. I mean, these are the only two reasons why, you let people go ever. And I said that itself is a problem that you have to deal with, which is probably the subject of another discussion. That, if it will only attract the only kind of person you will attract as an employee. Let's take the entire approach to investment. Providing capital to a startup is of good value, but you have to bring in something more. You have to bring in ideas, you have to bring in connections, you have to bring in encouragement, and a whole lot of more for that startup ecosystem to function. Just by saying I'll write out a check, you're actually writing off that amount. If you're saying I will commit to being a mentor, I will understand what you want to do, I will guide you, I will help you, I will bring in other people from who I know, I will do the introductions, create that network. Now let me give you an example of some of the metrics that are used. We always say that you look at it, most of the startups in India are still burning money. Other than one or two, which have started making money, most of them are losing money. Okay, so it's all about burn. Now take one metric, which is called CAC, or the customer acquisition cost. Okay, now we know that when a big I think it was somebody who bought out Facebook or whoever was bought out at $60 a registered user. That was the customer acquisition cost that was paid. Okay, so the valuation is often done on number of eyeballs, number of hits. You know, see, Zomato and Swiggy still talk about they will talk about what is the cost of delivery and the profitability. They talk about you talk about gross merchandise value. You don't talk about actually how much what you're earning is. So the entire thing is different. But you have to understand that the landscape has changed. People are not valuing the business on a future cash flow or revenue potential or things like that anymore. They are looking at it, to be honest, and saying that can I raise the business stakes enough to bring in a valuation which is higher and bring in the next round of valuation, and one day these are all models which are monopolistic in nature. It's like I'll be the last survivor and therefore I will make money. Okay, so now, but let's go back to the old, the metric of CAC or customer acquisition cost, and then there is something called a lifetime value, LTV.
Lifetime value.
Lifetime value. Now, CAC and LTV are completely interrelated. You would very easily spend a lot of money to acquire a customer whose lifetime value is over 60 years, let's say. Let's say if you're selling financial products, now financial products is a lifestyle thing. As we've advised our financial institutions to say, take a perspective of your customer based on their life cycle. Okay, start them early as giving them a student credit card or a student loan. When the person matures, joins a job, give them different products, different offerings, and different services, and then take them through the whole plethora. Now, how much would you be willing to pay for acquiring a customer? Let's say a good customer. Let's say somebody who goes to one of the good business schools. Before that, engineering is still, there are fewer loans taken for engineering or graduate study in India. The loans really start at the postgraduate level of study. So, do you want to catch them young? And how much? What will be the typical fee of a postgraduate course that somebody wants to do, whether it is industrial engineering or sometimes, I don't think the accounting profession gets paid. They get their measly stipend of 400 or 600 rupees a month, slaving away with senior chartered accountants. I like the community. I worked with them for a long time. I still do. But the point is that the articleship is pretty low.
But then they make it up, no? After they get the.
I agree. I agree. But talking of that, so what will you be willing to pay for acquiring a good customer? Because if he or she has joined a good business school, then they are most likely to find a good job and they will be a good customer lifelong. You would be willing to pay any amount, right? Because you're not looking at them from a transactional perspective. So this is, so the promoters sometimes, of the old school who want to see, what is the return on investment, what is the payback period. Some of those metrics don't work anymore. But having said that, you should still be, what is the unit cost of service or delivery? What is the, net accretion to the business? Those are still, there. As long as you cover cost of goods sold. And, we have models by which we explain to them, how during different phases of the startup also what metrics should be used.
Now, nowadays, I agree. Now when we see this dashboards for promoters and on their board meetings and all, but I think they resemble a lot from that Parta system which used to be there in old times. So the parameters are almost the same, or they may have changed little in that nomenclature, but they fundamentally they give you the same data that the promoter requires.
Has to be. Meeta, I've been sort of fortunate enough to work with Dick Nolan and Dave Norton. So I think, I've first-hand experience of working with the guys who came up with the balanced scorecard.
Oh, okay. Yes.
So the thinking is the same, which is you have to look at various dimensions of business performance, identify the metrics which represent performance, and then use it to implement strategy and to drive strategy. I mean, that's the goal. That doesn't change. Similarly, for a startup business also, they remain the same, but sometimes they are different. There is sometimes we find that, there is a lack of governance, not for the want of it, but just because there is the level of immaturity is very high. startups, unfortunately, in India have been associated with very young people, and these young people somehow lack the discipline of organizational, somebody, they don't, they don't care. We've seen somebody doesn't pay TDS on time. And these are all, very tough offenses to be taking on your shoulders.
They go back to the value system also. Mr. Veera, very quickly want your take on how the growth which is happening in today's time, and we studied a lot of first generation entrepreneurs who are Flipkarters and Hotmailers and inventors of that, and then they have moved out from one business to other business. So growth is also multi-dimensional. So would you like to share very quickly your thought on how the growth aspect is becoming multi-dimensional and not just running the traditional businesses?
Sure. There is.
Quick take.
I said, things are getting quite complex now. Now, those who have very high growth are not even talking about generation next because they have not even got married. They've sold Flipkarts before they found a girl to be their wife. So that's the kind of growth that successful companies are having. Bhatia of Hotmail, Flipkart, huge growth and very fast. So there's no time to go through all the 5Gs in that sequence. The other point I'd like to make is that even in family businesses, those families who have had difficulties and their next generation has had to face adversity are those who have successfully faced that adversity and shown tremendous innovation. Take the example of Wipro. He's coming back to hydrogenated oils and yet not coming back to hydrogenated oils. He's gone into a different line altogether, keeping the name Wipro, which is still vegetable proteins, but nothing to do with the business that they are in. Take the case of Ajit Singh of Associated Capsules, who had to run back to India with his brother because his father had died and left a capsule company with heavy debts to be run by his wife and his sons. Both coming back, all three of them together, trying to revive this company. And today it's among the biggest capsule companies in the world. All the time you will see adversity is also a foundation for future great success.
What is the suggestion from our panelists that how to get the promoters to set up a family management team to enhance asset management and governance in a structured manner? I mean, that can help, which may help the promoters to grow their business. Would you have any example with our experience, or that can convince the promoters to set up such teams?
I usually, working with a team of experts, while I remain the principal advisor to the family, I step away from the tax and the other angles. But typically the process followed is very simple, which I'm sure, Meeta is an expert and she'll tell you more. But it's about, saying that we need to get them to recognize that managing the family wealth is one thing and managing the business is another thing. So the first thing is they have to prepare them mentally to separate the two. Okay. The second is once we do that, then there are various constructs that are possible. You can set up a family office which takes care of investments. You can set up a family constitution, which is nothing but a set of rules as to how the family will operate. And that typically has 4 or 5 primary features as I see it, Who will enter the family business, based on what rules, based on what background and things like that. All those rules get enshrined, And then, one of the concepts which maybe Meeta, you can tell them is that, when they are bringing in outsiders, I usually insist on a clause which is voting with the CEO stock, because you cannot have a lame duck CEO as an outside professional. So what I say is that for a period of 12 to 18 months, provided the CEO convinces the family of a new transformation or a business plan, then a minimum of family votes will be supporting him or her. I call it voting with the CEO block of votes, that you will not undermine him by simply saying, at the board, this is not going to be allowed. That commitment has to be brought in. And then the usual constructs are there. Get your tax advisors in, get your lawyers in, do it in a tax efficient, legal manner. Do it in a way, and if you set up a family office, now coming to managing assets, whether they are your own assets or your investments into other things, get a professional investment banker to come and run that family office for you if you don't have the competencies in house. Because somebody has to take a divorced and a arm's length view of looking at that investment and saying, I am running a fund on behalf of someone else, whether as a GP or an LP or whatever, it doesn't matter. But I am running a fund. I am responsible for the owners of the capital to give them a return, and I will run it like a fund. So that divorce is one thing, and the second is to bring in a professional, could be from the family, who is an investment banker who is taking a purely investment banking approach to the family wealth and saying, I'm looking at investment.
I agree the way that you are doing, and I would say here that we help, or say when we such situations come, we work with the families. We help them to set up a quasi business, family business board, because not all family members are used to board management. So we help them, coach them how the board works or the thinking and the style of working. That once you get into that professional mindset, then it becomes easy to work with professionals. But before that, the families need to do that. So there are certain ways where family promoters or family promoter families can be, or founders can be put in the process, and they can have their growth path, which is very professional in nature. When we talk about family business and growth, unfortunately in India, and I think in other countries also, even well developed countries, gender differentiation still exists. We are becoming happy by seeing that so many women from the family are coming up, daughters and daughter-in-laws are coming up and taking the reins of the business. In last 10 years, 15 years, we are seeing the numbers have grown up. Even the numbers on the board also, women on the board also has gone up, but still we are minuscule in terms of percentage. And a very interesting conversation. I think, gentlemen, you have brought in here and answered our queries. So I thank you and thank everyone here, our participants. We appreciate your being here. Thanks to IMCI Mumbai chapter for partnering with us. And I must there's a special mention for Equations and IMCI's office teams for their support and making this possible. And Mr. Vieira and Mr. Pradhan, thank you very much.